Hilary, Aaron and colleagues, thanks very much. As Hilary said, my name is Stephen Kelly. I'm Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland. We're partners with Make UK here across the Irish Sea in Northern Ireland. And we do very many things very similar, and we certainly do lots of stuff together, particularly in regards to the issue of Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol. So I'll quickly take you through where we are. Some people may know lots of this detail. I suspect many won't. So it's quite high level in terms of what is the protocol and what do you need to do to continue to trade goods into Northern Ireland. Basics first, the protocol was established as part of the UK and the EU's withdrawal agreement, and it was negotiated back in October 2019 and ratified by both the UK and the EU parliaments at the end of January and beginning of February of this year. That began the 11-month transition period, which we're 3 weeks from ending at the moment. The purpose of the protocol was essentially to do three things. One was to ensure that there was no return to any physical border infrastructure on the island of Ireland, to protect the all-island economy, and to protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And essentially, the protocol establishes a brand new status for goods that are being traded into Northern Ireland and from Great Britain. It is not dependent on the current free trade negotiations that are on a knife edge at the moment. And things are different for Northern Ireland and for trading to Northern Ireland, regardless of that free trade agreement being agreed between the UK and the EU or not. So the first important point is that this is a status that will remain regardless of that free trade agreement or not. The protocol is governed by a new committee called the Joint Committee. It's supported by specialised committees, and it's a living document, and changes will be made to resolve those issues as they're identified and potentially to improve the deal. So news earlier this week, a statement from Michael Gove in Parliament yesterday outlined some new agreement that the UK and the EU have arrived at in terms of some issues with the protocol, some derogations that are required, particularly around the movement of supermarket goods, and some other information which will become available probably from tomorrow, but certainly by Monday when the Joint Committee agree to formally adopt the proposals. What the protocol essentially means is that uniquely Northern Ireland goods can freely circulate in the EU single market, but it will be subject to single market rules and VAT rules. Nowhere else in the UK, regardless of a deal or not, will have that status of being able to have their goods freely circulate within the EU's marketplace. Additionally, as a sovereign nation, the EU has confirmed that the UK can provide unfettered access to Northern Ireland goods into the UK's internal market. So there will be no controls for the stuff that's made in Northern Ireland to go back into the rest of the UK. And there's free circulation of our goods within the EU. Northern Ireland remains part of the UK's custom territory. And what that means is that those free trade agreements that the government is negotiating, I think we're up to 56 at the moment, Northern Ireland will be beneficiaries of those free trade agreements. However, the UK will operate as an agent on behalf of the EU in terms of a customs border across the Irish Sea. So for goods travelling from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, there will be customs and plant and animal health procedures that the EU will insist on as its external border, but the UK will operate on behalf of the EU. So what all this means in summary is that uniquely Northern Irish goods will have tariff, quota, rules of origin, and indeed customs-free trade, both with the EU and the Great British market. The checks and controls are in one direction only, which is from GB into Northern Ireland. And the cost of this free trade for our goods with the EU and with the rest of the UK is those customs controls only in the Irish Sea from Britain into Northern Ireland. The thing to really stress is that this is a new status that comes from the 1st of January 2021. There's lots of reports of grace periods, lots of reports of further periods to allow systems and processes to be implemented on the short straits between Dover and Cali. But this status comes into play on the 1st of January, just 22 days time. So if you make goods in Great Britain and you're looking to place those goods on the Northern Ireland market, whether that's with as a supplier or directly to consumers, there's a number of things that you must know. The first thing to say is that because we're part of the EU's single market, all goods must continue to be manufactured to the relevant EU rules. And in many respects, because an EU conformity marking is required, that means that CE marking for most goods will continue to be required. So if you sell goods anywhere in the EU currently and you plan to do that after the 1st of January 2021, then the same rules will apply to Northern Ireland in terms of conformity assessments and ensuring that your goods meet those EU standards. What it means is that if you use a UK conformity assessment provider, then you also have to include not just a CE marking, but a new UK NI marking. So many on the call will be familiar with the new UKCA conformity assessment marking. That cannot be used in Northern Ireland. So if you intend to send goods to Northern Ireland, you have to use the CE mark. And if you use a UK body to provide you with those conformity assessments, then you need also to have the UK NI marking. What it does mean for us in Northern Ireland is that we only need one set of marking. So if we have the CE marking, which we're required to do, that because of the unfettered access rules, that means that our goods can freely circulate in the rest of the UK marketplace. We only require that CE marking if you make stuff here in Northern Ireland and intend on selling it across in Great Britain. So how do you get goods to Northern Ireland? So from a Great Britain to a Northern Ireland direction, there's a number of things which people will be very familiar of, particularly if they're selling to other markets. So you do need those descriptions and commodity codes, the consignor and consignee, as we heard in our earlier presentations, the type and amount of packaging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in addition to that, if you're selling foods or particularly goods of animal origin, all those goods will have to enter Northern Ireland through a border control post, where they'll be subjected to SPS checks by a vet from our local agricultural department. So the goods will arrive at a port in Britain. They will be permitted to enter the boat and travel across. But if your goods require SPS checks, then those will have to enter Northern Ireland through those border control posts. In terms of goods from EU into Northern Ireland, then essentially there's no change. So from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland, just free trade and travel as we do today. If we bring stuff from the EU to Northern Ireland via Great Britain, then those travel through the transit arrangements, some of which were mentioned earlier. And indeed, if goods are sent to the EU to Northern Ireland, exiting GB, because they've already cleared customs at that point when they've entered GB, there's no change there as well. And as mentioned earlier, if we're selling either to GB or to the EU, there's no change from the current arrangements. It's really important, if people haven't already engaged with them, but I know most manufacturers have, that they understand the Incoterms. So if you're selling to a Northern Ireland customer, agree with them in advance what those Incoterms will be, so that it's clear who has the responsibility for any customs administration, any tariffs, should relationships completely break down, and it's clear to the customs authorities whose responsibility it is. The goods vehicle movement systems briefly mentioned earlier. I'll not go into detail in terms of this slide, because we know the slides are going to be shared afterwards. And at the bottom of this slide, there's actually a YouTube link to a HMRC webinar, which talks about the goods vehicle movement system. But same principle applies. If you're currently selling to any other part of the EU and you wish to continue to sell into Northern Ireland, then you'll have to go through the GVMS system, load on the information, and ensure that all that information is there whenever the vehicle arrives at check-in at the ferry port in Scotland or in England. So some things you really should do. The first thing is As part of the UK's commitment to ensure that trade continues to flow freely throughout the UK, they've established what's called the Trader Support Service. This is a £355 million service as part of the Northern Ireland Protocol, as part of the UK's commitment to support businesses in GB and in Northern Ireland to ensure that trade between Northern Ireland and GB remains as frictionless as possible. That service is there to provide essentially two things. One is there's a training element. So when you register, you become part of their training academy. So the latest news and information, which is relevant for trading to Northern Ireland and indeed relevant for trading with the European Union, will be available to you. And secondly, they're there to support the completion of all the customs requirements and documentation. So if you're moving anything from GB to NI, regardless of whose responsibility it is, whether it's the importer here in Northern Ireland or whether it's you as the exporter from the rest of the UK, you should sign up for the Trader Support Service. It's free, it's a source of good information, but it's also a source of practical support where they'll be able to assist businesses to ensure that that trade continues to flow as smoothly as possible. The second thing is an EORI number, and if you wish to continue to trade with the EU, you will have one of these. You should certainly register for those, and indeed, if you register with the Trader Support Service between now and the end of this week, you'll automatically be enrolled in that. Northern Ireland businesses will have a separate identifier, so we'll have an XI EORI number. And if you're sending goods across, then you should make sure that your customer here in Northern Ireland provides you with that XI EORI number. As of yesterday, there was something in the region of 19,000 UK businesses registered with the Trader Support Service. And the vast majority of those were businesses in Great Britain who continue to sell into Northern Ireland. So the TSS and this EORI number are critical elements and simple and free elements that you should engage with today. Next thing is, do your goods meet the EU standard? We all currently meet those standards because we're all part of the EU single market. Because Northern Ireland as a territory will have to ensure that goods here meet those EU standards, then you need to ensure, if you're sending stuff, that you keep aware of what those EU standards are, and you ensure that your goods meet those standards if you wish to send them across to Northern Ireland. Your haulier is going to be a critically important partner for you. Whenever the vehicle arrives at one of the GB ports en route to Northern Ireland, or indeed when it arrives at a GB port en route to Dublin Port as an important transit route to Northern Ireland, they need to make sure that all the information is ready and that the detail is loaded onto the goods vehicle movement system. So whatever haulier you're using at the moment, whether that's an external haulier or whether you're doing your own movement of goods, you should really ensure that you understand the processes, talk to your customers and understand your own data that's required, so that's loaded up onto the system. And when the vehicle arrives up to 2 hours before the sailing, that all those details are ready and correct, and that when you check in, you're able to board the ferry and travel. And lastly, just in summary, the protocol brings very many complications, but it brings quite considerable opportunity for Northern Ireland. We are uniquely, regardless of what happens in over this next weekend or between now and the end of this year, we will uniquely be able to have tariff, quota and customs-free access to both the Great British market and the EU market. So as a last pitch, if you're interested in a production facility which enjoys that status, you're free to give me a call. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We've got quite a few questions, so we'll jump onto them just now. So will goods moving from the EU to NI which go through Great Britain need to follow common transit rules, including the authorised consignor or consignee status?
Yes, they do. And the Trader Support Service, which I mentioned, can assist you to ensure that that continues to flow freely. But yes, it won't require the full customs rigmarole, but it can operate through those transit systems.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Next question. When is the UK NI marking mandatory?
It'll be mandatory from the 1st of January.
Next question. I understand there's an additional EORI number companies require to be able to send goods into Northern Ireland, beginning with XI. Are you able to tell us how we can apply for this? Because we've not been able to find it anywhere.
So, as I mentioned in the presentation, if people register today and before the end of this week with the Trader Support Service, and the URL is on the presentation that I shared, but if you Google Trader Support Service, it'll bring up those details. You will be auto-enrolled into that system. Northern Irish firms need that XI EORI. UK firms that continue to want to trade with the EU, including Northern Ireland, will just need their own EORI number. But if you register through that Trader Support Service, they will look after all that registration process for you.
Super. Just one thing, Aaron, before you move on to the next question, as a sort of a quick follow-up to that, there's another question come through saying, so the free Trader Support Service is available to all traders moving goods between GB and Northern Ireland and those who import goods into Northern Ireland. If I sign up with them, does that mean I don't have to do anything? They'll do it all for me?
No, you will still be required to ensure that all the information is available and present and correct, and that it's there. So when your vehicle arrives, or your logistics firm's vehicle arrives, to check in at the Stena line or P&O or any of the other services, that's present and correct at that moment in time. The Trader Support Service will guide you through that process. It will create a number of the digital documents that you require, but you have a responsibility to upload the information first. There is a bulk upload opportunity. So there's an API, as they call it, to allow you to put in lots of data at the single point in time. But they'll essentially hold a digital wallet on your behalf containing all this information. And that information then will be shared across all the digital platforms that will be required to run those customs processes.
So they do a bulk of the work for you, but you'll have to provide the actual information that feeds into the into the structure.
Absolutely. I'll share after the event. I'll share a webinar that we have undertaken with the TSS, including their slides and quite considerable Q&A answers as well. So Hilary and Aaron, if you're content, alongside my presentation, I'll send you more information and more links to that stuff that will be useful to people.
That'd be really helpful, because there's quite a few questions basically asking the same question, like how much will the Trader Support Service do for me, because we haven't really started yet. So that'd be really handy. Thank you.
It's just important to say the Trader Support Service won't go live until the 21st of December. And the period between now and then is being used for three purposes, I suppose. One is to get people registered with the system. The second is for those people that are registered to begin to upload their data, that master data that's important for them to be able to create the documents, etc., for you. And then the third thing is that people can get trained and understand the processes that are required. And those processes that are required will be useful not just on the Irish Sea, but be useful for businesses. And that information will be useful for businesses selling anywhere in the EU or bringing stuff in from the EU.
Thanks very much. Aaron, next question.
Next question. Will a GB-based company be able to complete an import declaration for goods they are shipping to Northern Ireland, even if they are not established in Northern Ireland?
Short answer to that is yes. It depends on the circumstances. I mean, it sounds to me almost like they may be selling directly to consumers or whatever, and in that case, absolutely. This isn't dependent on a Northern Irish qualifying company status. You don't, for this purposes, you don't need to be. That really becomes an issue on things going the opposite direction at some point in 2021. So at the moment, there's no qualifying status for what is a Northern Irish company. So anybody bringing stuff through Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK is entitled to that unfettered access. But at some point in 2021, HMRC, the UK government, will define what is a Northern Irish company. And at that point, only those companies will be able to benefit from that unfettered access. So why are they doing that? At this point in time, and for the first few months of next year, there is a potential risk, particularly in a no-deal scenario, where an Irish company, a Southern Irish company, or another European company could just bring stuff through Northern Ireland and enter into Great Britain without any checks or controls, and that means that they've essentially got tariff-free access into there. Now, it's a pretty difficult process to bring stuff from continental Europe, get it across into Ireland, get it up to Northern Ireland, bring it across into GB. The cost and complexity of that is quite large, but there is a risk of fraud and tariff avoidance at that point in time. So the UK government will be bringing in a qualifying status for Northern Irish businesses so that they can continue to enjoy that unfettered access into the rest of the UK. Now, we understand it's going to be pretty light touch. It'll be based on having premises and having people and having a tax address, et cetera, in here, and behind the door auditing of that process rather than coming and visiting and presenting documents, et cetera. But at this point in time, there's no qualifying status for unfettered from Northern Ireland into GB. And those GB companies who are sending stuff to Northern Ireland can complete all these customs formalities in advance.
Thank you, Stephen.
So another one here. How are goods deemed at risk of onward movement into the EU actually identified? So obviously they'll be subject to EU duties.
So though the Joint Committee agreement this week, the details of that have yet to be published. So there was some media commentary about it. The Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, Michael Gove, yesterday made a statement in the House, but the agreement that the UK and EU made at the Joint Committee earlier this week has still to go through the EU processes of being approved. That will be finally approved by Monday at the latest, but probably from tomorrow we will begin to see some of the detail of that. At risk will largely be, our understanding at this point in time is that at risk won't be based on a tariff differential. It won't be based on a floor or a ceiling in terms of differences in tariffs. It'll be based on other criteria as well. The UK's interpretation of it is that at maximum 2% of goods that arrive into Northern Ireland may be viewed as being at risk. So the vast bulk, 98% of stuff, will be viewed not being at risk. Even those goods that are at risk, the UK is also committed that if there's any tariff to be paid, that tariff will be reimbursed by the UK government themselves. So in effect, trade with Northern Ireland will continue tariff-free regardless of the outcome come the 1st of January onwards.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Aaron, next question.
Next question. Do we continue to charge VAT on goods supplied into Northern Ireland?
Yeah, the Northern Ireland will remain part of the UK's VAT regime, and HMRC will administer that regime. So the type of trade that you do at the moment will continue as it does in the future. There are VAT complications for Northern Irish companies, but those are largely around access to EU VAT systems, which allow us to recover the VAT on an easier basis than the rest of the UK.
Thank you.
If customers are returning goods from Northern Ireland to GB, do they need to have an XI URI number to do this?
No. So if you sell something from GB into Northern Ireland and it's been returned, that travels unfettered. So there's no customs controls at that point.
Thank you.
Will couriers be using a different country coding for Northern Ireland?
Not that we're aware of, no.
Thank you.
If goods are sold from GB to Northern Ireland, but then those goods are re-exported to the EU by the NI company, is any duty payable GB to NI?
No is the short answer. Until we see the detail of what's been agreed with the Joint Committee this week, there could be issues in and around origin at that point, but Our understanding is that no, there aren't. So it's only if goods are being moved to Northern Ireland and are essentially being warehoused and dispatched as almost like retail that there becomes an issue at that point. But when you're bringing them across, there's a process being applied to them by a Northern Irish firm, and that's then being sold on to Ireland or anywhere in the EU, then none of that applies.
Next question. Even when Incoterms have been agreed with a Northern Ireland customer, can or will the GB supplier still be held responsible for any tariffs if the goods are forwarded to the Republic?
So the importer into Northern Ireland has the ultimate responsibility for importing the goods. So if you agree Incoterms that ensures that responsibility is here in Northern Ireland, then there's no danger for the GB firm.
Thank you.
Okay, lovely. I actually think that is it in terms of questions. There were lots and lots on the VAT stuff that you've answered already, and loads on the Trader Support Service. So I'm sure there'll be many others, and a couple of people have asked how they can contact you. So I'm sure that after the webinar, we can make sure we put some sort of contact, Stephen, that you can get in touch with them directly. Because I'm sure there are lots more questions to ask in the coming weeks. So really, it just remains